Hey everyone, tonight we're diving into the story of a man who should have remained invisible and yet became the ghost that haunted the world's most feared intelligence networks. For years, Mossad, CIA, and other top agencies chased shadows and secrets, believing they were always in control. But one man moved through Damascus like a phantom, testing the limits of observation, patience, and strategy. Imad Mughniyeh. To some, a master of terror. To others, an enigma who left even the most skilled operatives second-guessing every move. Before we begin, go ahead and hit like and subscribe, only if you genuinely love stories from the hidden corridors of espionage. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing who's awake, chasing shadows around the world night after night. Now, settle in and slow your thoughts. Tonight, we're stepping into the streets of Damascus. When silence ruled the alleys, coded messages whispered across safehouses, and Mossad's ghost hunters found themselves tracking a shadow that seemed always one step ahead. A photograph slides across a desk in Tel Aviv, grainy, ordinary, yet electric. A man in a gray jacket, a cigarette half lit, walking through a Damascus street with the casual rhythm of someone who knows he's invisible. No name, no timestamp, just coordinates scrawled in pencil and a note. He's back. The room holds its breath. Every intelligence officer who has ever chased a ghost knows that silence is louder than proof, and this silence feels deafening. For 2 decades, Imad Mughniyeh had been a phantom, vanishing between wars, borders, and identities, leaving behind only the wreckage of others' certainty. Now, he's been seen again, and the hunt resumes, in the same stillness in which it once failed. The city chosen as his shelter is Damascus, where the walls are older than secrets, and every whisper carries the weight of history. The Watchers arrive not as soldiers, but as phantoms themselves. Diplomatic couriers, aid consultants, logistics coordinators for innocuous NGOs. Their passports pass scrutiny because their eyes do not. They study every gate, every alley that bends into shadow, and every car that returns to the same street twice. One of them writes in a ciphered report, "The man breathes through routine. Break the routine and he'll disappear again." There are no orders yet, only observation. Patience is the first weapon. Months pass beneath the monotone hum of air conditioners and bad coffee. The teams map his life by silence, when he leaves without a phone, when his car parks in unlit lots, when he vanishes into meetings that never appear in Syrian logs. They build a portrait, not of the man, but of the gaps he leaves behind. One analyst, young and exhausted, murmurs, "He's constructing absence like architecture." The operations cover expands. A relief foundation leases an office near the old city. Another shell group registers a warehouse for medical supplies, though nothing inside is sterile except the lies. The city accepts them because Damascus always has. It has hosted empires, pilgrims, and spies with equal indifference. Each operative knows that discovery here doesn't mean capture. It means disappearance without record. Yet they stay because the trail has finally grown warm after years of cold files and unsolved grief. In a sealed basement, the Watchers create a logbook. Every detail, license plates, street sounds, intervals of his movements, is recorded in a hand so neat it borders on reverence. The file grows heavier by the hour, and with it, the unspoken dread that they might be seen by the very man they are seeing. Mughniyeh's legend was built on turning hunters into prey, and more than one operative dreams of hearing a knock on their door in the middle of the night. Fear becomes a routine too, folded into the paperwork. At the compound, the senior liaison reviews the data, expression readable. The last time his name crossed the wires, the world changed in flames. Now the mission is not revenge nor justice. It is a correction of unfinished history. Still, the handler senses unease among his own. They whisper that the man they track is myth, more than mortal. Myths don't bleed, they say, but the city might. He silences them with a simple line. You can't erase a ghost until you prove it exists. Days melt into coded transmissions and fleeting shadows. The watchers begin to recognize him from his silhouette alone. In crowded markets, a single tilt of his head sets their pulses racing. He seems to sense the air tightening around him, sometimes pausing mid-stride as if listening to the unseen. But then he moves on, unhurried, indifferent, like a man who knows he's still beyond reach. The team calls him the Phantom, half mocking, half afraid that the name will stick to them too. One evening, a courier from the fake relief office follows a lead to the outskirts, where trucks offload unmarked crates labeled as spare parts. The manifest shows nothing unusual, but an embedded tracker, inserted weeks earlier under the guise of customs paperwork, shows a route intersecting with one of Mughniyeh's convoys. The handler stares at the blinking light on the screen, a heartbeat of distance shrinking by the second. He knows that pressing further might expose the whole network. He also knows that not pressing means losing the Phantom again. He chooses stillness. The convoy fades into the night, unpursued. The order is simple: observe, record, never act. Yet the silence after that command feels heavier than noise, because everyone understands that watching without intervening corrodes the watcher first. In the underground safe house, someone scratches on the wall, "How long can you follow a ghost before you become one?" The answer comes not in words, but in the pattern of days that follow. Surveillance teams rotate, each inheriting the same endless caution. They track through mirrors, reflections on shop windows, security cameras whose feeds are patched through labyrinthine routes. They learn to breathe when he breathes, to move when he moves, to vanish when he stops. The city becomes an extension of their nerves, and Damascus, ancient, sleepless, unblinking, swallows their individuality whole. Then, one afternoon, the logbook receives an entry so precise it freezes every reader. Subject paused at 1607, staring at reflection in glass, appeared to smile. No explanation, no conclusion. Just the single unsettling fact that the ghost may have seen his own shadow and found it amusing. The handler closes the book, aware that surveillance has changed nothing except the watchers themselves. The Phantom is alive, aware, and still one step ahead. The real story is only beginning, and in the undercurrent of Damascus, beginnings never announce themselves. They blend with what already exists. The watchers knew that to follow a man who did not officially exist, they would have to become invisible in ways paperwork couldn't explain. The fake relief office expanded its reach under the pretext of regional aid coordination, its staff multiplying through carefully constructed identities. Volunteers arrived with forged resumes and genuine idealism, unaware that their presence helped mask operatives slipping between roles. Every layer of cover was a mirror reflecting another lie, and beneath it, a smaller circle met in silence to trace the Phantom's orbit. The watchers built their map not from streets, but from habits, where the couriers stopped for tea, which alley lights flickered at the same hour each night, which security patrols looked away too long. They planted observation posts in apartments whose tenants had quietly left, filled with secondhand furniture and the smell of dust. From these vantage points, they recorded the rhythm of the city, learning that even silence had a schedule. The closer they studied him, the more Damascus itself seemed to conspire in his defense. Alleys narrowed when he passed, cars broke down at the wrong moment, and once an entire block's power failed just as he crossed it. Coincidence or signal, they couldn't tell. Rumors of a front company moving humanitarian goods from Lebanon into Syria became the first meaningful thread. The shipments were legitimate on paper: medical equipment, spare parts, even children's clothing, but the handlers noticed inconsistencies in weight and timing. The cargo logs arrived early, the trucks arrived late. It was enough to justify observation. An operative embedded as a logistics officer traced the route one night, shadowing headlights that dipped in and out of checkpoints like dancers rehearsed to precision. The convoy stopped near a warehouse that was not on any map. Inside, He glimpsed a figure signing manifests with a left hand, head slightly bowed, the same gesture that appeared in the grainy photo weeks earlier. He didn't need to see the face to know. The Phantom moved merchandise under the skin of the city, and every shipment was another layer of concealment. No one dared confront it directly. Instead, they began weaving their presence deeper into the same web. A newly registered NGO, the Levant Restoration Initiative, became their most useful mask. Its stated mission was cultural preservation. Its real purpose was to rent a property 2 streets from one of Mughniyeh's safe zones. Every press release, every conference attendance, every handshake at a reception hall served as camouflage for cables strung across ceilings and microphones hidden inside wall paint. The art of espionage here wasn't aggression, but mimicry, mirroring the city's natural bureaucracy until the deception became indistinguishable from reality. The handlers rotated personnel frequently. No one stayed longer than 6 weeks in the same cover to prevent patterns from forming. Those who returned home carried the scent of Damascus with them: dust, exhaustion, and the aftertaste of paranoia. They were told to forget everything they'd seen, but memory has no off switch. A few started recording dreams, recurring images of the man they shadowed appearing in crowds, smiling faintly before turning away. Some wondered if they were still on assignment even after leaving. Others avoided reflections altogether. The intelligence gathered was shared in fragments across secure channels, each fragment stripped of context to protect the whole. It was an elegant cruelty of the trade. Everyone knew pieces. No one knew the picture. The man directing the operation, known to most simply as Yuri, carried the burden of connecting the fragments. He worked in near total isolation, surrounded by unmarked envelopes and stale air. When he spoke, it was rarely more than a sentence. One night, reviewing the courier logs, he whispered to his assistant, "He's beginning to change his route. That means he knows we're here." The assistant said nothing. To acknowledge the thought was to make it real. Still, the watchers pushed forward. They infiltrated an international school's maintenance staff, a telecommunications subcontractor, and a small clinic that handled refugee registrations. All legitimate, all quietly repurposed. Each placement yielded minor gains: an intercepted voicemail, a photograph of a car's license plate, a pattern in fuel purchases. Together they formed a constellation so faint it would vanish under scrutiny, yet Yuri could sense the outline forming. The Phantom was not untouchable. He was disciplined, predictable, human. That realization was dangerous. Once a myth looks human, someone will decide it can be undone. Weeks turned into months, and patience began to rot. The men and women buried in false lives started craving movement, proof, an endpoint. One field agent, posing as a cultural attaché, began following the Phantom's courier beyond the agreed radius. He returned at dawn, shaken and wordless, handing Yuri a torn page from a notebook. On it, a single line in Arabic: "You are walking too close to your own shadow." No one could confirm how it was obtained. The courier vanished days later. The message became both warning and curse. The network reacted by folding inward. Communications were tightened, safehouses changed, faces replaced. Yuri sent a final encrypted note to headquarters: target's pattern collapsing, observation to continue, no exposure permitted. Beneath the coded efficiency, there was something like admiration, a recognition of the precision with which the hunted dismantled the hunt. The operation continued anyway, because obsession disguised as duty is indistinguishable from loyalty. Night after night, the Phantom crossed the same streets, and the watchers followed, their covers fraying, their nerves raw. They no longer remembered why they began, or what victory would look like. Each update read like a confession, each intercepted signal another reminder of how fragile invisibility truly was. Then, one evening, an unmarked van stopped outside the fake NGO's office. 2 men unloaded boxes labeled as archival materials and left without a word. Inside the top box lay a single file folder. It contained a photograph, recent, clear, unmistakable. The same man, same street, the faint trace of a smile. The caption beneath was written in an unfamiliar hand. "You are still late." The watchers stared at the image in silence. No one dared to ask who had delivered it or how the sender knew where to leave it. They understood now that in the heart of Damascus, the line between hunter and hunted had vanished completely. And somewhere in the maze of alleys and false walls, the phantom walked freely, aware that the eyes upon him were blinking. The watchers froze at the doorway, the empty apartment lingering like a question that refused an answer. The faint scent of tea, gone cold, hovered over the scattered papers and the half-lit candle someone had forgotten to extinguish. Somewhere beyond the walls, Damascus moved with its habitual indifference. But inside, the city was a trap door. Every sound, every echo carried the weight of unseen eyes. They had already begun tracing the rhythm of the phantom's life, and now, each footstep in their safe house felt like a beat in a countdown. The unremarkable streets outside had become corridors in a labyrinth where they were not just hunters, they were intruders, every moment one misstep away from discovery. By sunrise, surveillance teams had dispersed to multiple points across the city. The operation had expanded beyond the NGO and the warehouse. New fronts were necessary to keep him unaware that he was being followed. A small import-export office near Barada Street had been registered under a local contractor's name, ostensibly shipping textiles, but its real purpose was observation. Agents were embedded as clerks, interns, and drivers, their papers clean, their identities ironclad. Yet, each passing day the paranoia of being noticed gnawed at them. The phantom moved unpredictably in minor ways, testing routes, measuring patterns, ensuring no one could predict where he would appear next. Each adjustment forced the watchers to adapt, shifting positions, changing cover stories, rotating personnel like pieces in a game whose rules only he seemed to understand. Communications ran through coded channels. Texts disguised as maintenance requests, phone calls that seemed mundane, emails that referenced forgotten deliveries, all carried hidden instructions, updated coordinates, and reports of unusual activity. Every operative learned to read the pattern between lines, to hear the intention behind silence. One courier noted that a call about a missing shipment coincided with the phantom's appearance at a cafe. No one spoke of it openly, but the implication was clear. He was aware. The city itself seemed to bend toward the phantom's will, buildings shadowing his movements, streetlights flickering to mark paths only he knew. Every tracking point became a risk. One misread angle, one mistimed shadow, and the hunter could become prey. A new layer of surveillance began to emerge in the residential districts he frequented. An apartment directly across from a small fruit market was leased under a shell company. From its windows, agents could watch alleyways he often used. At first, the phantom's movements were mechanical, habitual, almost lazy. But soon, anomalies appeared. He lingered near walls, glanced upward, tilted his head as though sensing the presence of someone watching. A junior operative whispered to her partner, "He knows we're close. He feels it." The partner said nothing because to speak was to acknowledge fear, and acknowledgement made it real. The operation scale grew almost imperceptibly. A cultural center that advertised language classes doubled as a node for intercepting signals. Microphones, encrypted transmitters, and discrete observation posts allowed them to log every meeting, every delivery, and every minor deviation from routine. It was not just surveillance, it was construction of a web. Yet, even in this meticulous work, the phantom found ways to leave gaps, moments of absence that suggested intelligence on his part. One night, a courier assigned to tail him returned hours late, flustered and silent. The logbook recorded the anomaly. Subject paused mid-route, vanished from sight for 12 minutes. No explanation, no recording, only uncertainty. Days blurred into one another. The watchers began measuring time in the phantom's schedule rather than their own. When he left for the cafe at 8:17, when he crossed the square at 14:03, when he vanished into a narrow alley at 17:42, They recorded it meticulously, then waited for the irregularity. It was in those irregularities that fear resided. One operative, stationed in a rooftop apartment, traced his silhouette against the setting sun, noting the ease with which he disappeared into the shadows. The lines between patience and obsession began to blur. They could not intervene. Every action had to be invisible. The city, ever watchful, seemed to whisper that exposure would be fatal. One afternoon, a delivery van carrying humanitarian supplies took a detour that intersected with the Phantom's route. It was supposed to be a routine observation, a low-risk tailing, but the van stalled near a checkpoint. The driver, nervous, fumbled with his documents. An operative in the shadows counted heartbeats, every moment stretched. And then the Phantom appeared, a figure crossing between sun and shade, glancing briefly in the direction of the van. The operative dared not move, did not breathe, as if the act itself could betray their position. The van started again. The Phantom continued. Nothing had happened, yet the tension was a tangible weight pressing on everyone present. They introduced a new operative, a man fluent in local dialects, ostensibly an academic studying urban development. His true role was to blend into the flow of the streets and observe subtle interactions. Who nodded at whom, which vendor greeted which customer, what vehicles lingered too long at intersections. It was a small piece of the web, yet critical. Through him, the team began to notice that the Phantom's routine included deliberate misdirection, routes that led nowhere, meetings that never existed, phone calls to numbers that were ghost lines. Every step he took was calculated to mislead. Yet, even in misdirection, there was traceable logic, and the watchers became obsessed with discovering it. Weeks passed. The city became a chessboard. Couriers carried coded notes disguised as invoices, lunches, and laundry receipts. A misplaced letter, a misread signal, or a delayed text could compromise everything. One evening, a team intercepted a call that referenced a change in patterns in the old quarter. The operative monitoring the line hesitated. It was vague, almost meaningless, but in intelligence, vagueness is often the most dangerous signal. The message implied knowledge of the surveillance network itself. At the warehouse fronts, the handlers discovered inconsistencies in shipment logs that suggested someone was aware of their presence. A crate arrived with subtle alterations, tape marks in unusual positions, fingerprints inconsistent with official staff. The implication was stark. The Phantom had either noticed or suspected. The team tightened protocols, yet tension escalated. Every action became cautious, every movement doubted, because the hunter had realized he was being hunted. Night surveillance became ritualized. Operatives spent hours on rooftops, tracking headlights, shadowing figures, and maintaining silence so perfect it ached in the ears. A courier noted the Phantom paused in a courtyard, standing still as if listening. The operative counted his breaths, the rhythm of steps against stone. He seemed almost to sense the web closing around him, yet never panicked. The watchers learned that to follow him was not just a matter of skill. It required restraint, patience, and a constant surrender to uncertainty. Encrypted communications threaded through the operation. One handler sent a message disguised as a supply requisition. No movement before 0400, position 7, secure, subject deviated, report immediately. Replies came back in brief bursts, punctuated by code words and silent acknowledgments. Each missive was a micro-operation, a pulse in the bloodstream of a larger hunt. In the field, operatives read signals between lines. A delayed response could mean surveillance detected. An unexpected answer could indicate interception. Trust was measured in seconds and gestures, not words. Then, an anomaly occurred. A courier assigned to shadow a secondary contact reported a near collision. A motorcycle cutting across the street at high speed, almost revealing his presence. He returned shaken, insisting someone had been watching him from a balcony. The handler in the safe house cataloged it. Compromise possible. Maintain cover. No one dared speculate further. Every operative knew the implication. The Phantom may have begun to manipulate their perception, testing how far the network extended. The operation expanded to a small clinic in the northern districts. Staff carried innocuous medical supplies, yet between deliveries they observed pedestrian patterns, noting which alleys emptied when he passed. Every routine interaction, every delivery became a thread in the fabric of observation. The Phantom's presence was inferred from absence, from gaps in normality, from minor deviations invisible to anyone not looking for them. A single misstep, an unguarded glance, or delayed delivery could expose a pattern they were only just beginning to understand. Months passed, and fatigue seeped into every operative. The city became a suffocating constant, a reminder that nothing moved without consequence. One night, a junior agent stationed on a quiet street corner whispered over the radio, "He's in the square. He knows." The handler replied, voice low, measured, "Then we must move slower, one step at a time." The advice was simple, yet survival depended on it. Even with intelligence, skill, and preparation, the Phantom dictated the rhythm. The watchers began leaving subtle messages in their logs, almost like confessions. Observations ended with phrases like, "Pattern altered, cannot predict," or "Subject seems aware, proceed cautiously." They had begun to realize that the Phantom's true skill was in being uncatchable, not by speed or strength, but by perception. He could manipulate the space around him, altering routines, routes, and expectations with a glance. An operative stationed in the northern compound reported a detail that sent chills through the team. The Phantom had made contact with someone previously unknown, a figure appearing briefly, exchanging a package that left no trace in shipping logs. For the first time, they were chasing not just him, but the shadow network supporting him, a layer beneath the layer they had already mapped. Every new front, every embedded operative, every coded signal was a potential risk. The hunter was now hunting the hunters. The tension reached a crescendo one evening when a routine check revealed an anomaly in the NGO's communication system. A previously secure line had been pinged, traced briefly to a street the team had considered empty. An agent on the roof noted a figure moving too smoothly, too deliberately, to be anything but the Phantom himself. He vanished moments later, leaving only the echo of a footstep. No confrontation occurred. No call was made. Yet, everyone understood. The Phantom had tested their vigilance and found it wanting. The handlers reviewed the data, each line a heartbeat. Maps of intersections, logs of deliveries, photographs of fleeting movements. They had grown into a dense mesh of information, yet the Phantom's maneuvers continued to unsettle the operation. He had become not just a target, but a force shaping the surveillance itself. Couriers hesitated, operatives double-checked cover stories, and even the most confident handler wondered if every move, every observation, was already anticipated. The final weeks of this phase were a masterclass in silent adaptation. Positions were shifted, observation posts rotated, identities rewritten, yet the Phantom adjusted to each change with an almost supernatural ease. A package delivered to a safe house contained only a single photograph. Him, standing in the square where the northern compound had watched hours earlier, faintly smiling, as if acknowledging the watchers without ever meeting their gaze. No note accompanied it, no threat implied, yet the meaning was unmistakable. He knew. In the quiet of the safe house, the handlers sat around the logbooks, tracing lines, checking coordinates, listening for patterns in the city's pulse. Each knew that they were engaged in a delicate dance. One misstep, one overlooked movement could unravel months of careful surveillance. The Phantom had taught them patience, humility, and fear in equal measure. The operation had become less about capture and more about endurance, and even that endurance felt perilous. As the night deepened, the streets of Damascus remained indifferent, absorbing the movements of the hunted and the hunters alike. The Phantom had tested them, manipulated them, and yet, unseen, continued his routine. Every alley, every rooftop, every delivery, every coded signal was a note in a symphony that only he conducted. And somewhere, in the quiet, the watchers realized that this phase of the hunt, the months of embedded fronts, coded communications, near exposures, was only the beginning. The city exhaled as dawn approached, and in that exhale, the operation understood that the Phantom's echo would continue to shape their every action. The lines between observer and observed blurred, and the unspoken knowledge spread among the team. The closer they came, the more dangerous it became, and the more they understood that in Damascus, invisibility was temporary, and even ghosts left traces. The dawn in Damascus brought no comfort, only a deceptive calm that settled over the city like a film of dust. Streets stirred with early traffic, vendors called in the familiar rhythm, and somewhere a child laughed, unaware that the city had become a battlefield of shadows. The watchers, spread across safehouses and disguised fronts, stirred as well, acutely aware that the Phantom had observed their every move the night before. The photograph left on the northern compound's desk was still there, a silent accusation, a reminder that every plan they executed was already inside his mind. They could feel it. The hunt had become a duel of anticipation, and every heartbeat carried the weight of potential failure. By mid-morning, the team had adjusted positions, shifting operatives like pieces across a chessboard, each movement carefully calculated to avoid detection. The Phantom's pattern, once predictable in its minor deviations, had become a complex lattice: a single courier delivery, a casual meeting near a fruit stand, a turn down a side street. All became points of observation, points to record, points to analyze. For each adjustment they made, he had already made 3 more, slipping through their network with the fluidity of smoke. In one cramped apartment overlooking the old city, a handler named Yael reviewed a stack of surveillance photos and shipment logs, the lines between them blurring into a single indecipherable pattern. "He's testing us," she muttered, not for the first time. Her assistant, a quiet operative fluent in half a dozen dialects, nodded without speaking. They had learned long ago that spoken words were dangerous in operations like this. They revealed assumptions, doubts, and fear. Everything had to move silently, like water through a maze. Meanwhile, the operational fronts multiplied. A small import-export firm near the southern bridge, ostensibly handling medical equipment, became a critical node. Agents embedded in the office monitored vehicle arrivals, noting discrepancies in weight and route compared to shipping manifests. A truck labeled as spare parts arrived late one evening, unaccompanied by proper documentation. A junior operative, assigned to photograph plates from a concealed vantage point, felt his pulse spike. The Phantom was likely nearby, yet completely invisible. A single misstep in documentation, a flicker of movement in the street, could blow the operation wide open. The first near exposure occurred subtly. A courier, trailing a suspected contact of the Phantom, reported a civilian noticing him and asking questions in broken Arabic. The operative froze, aware that acknowledgement could compromise weeks of work. The handler's voice, calm but firm over the secure line, instructed, "Stay put, nothing more. Make them believe you're invisible." The operative's hand shook as he logged the incident, understanding that surveillance in Damascus was no longer just observation. It was a delicate exercise in invisibility, the smallest error potentially catastrophic. Patterns were being disrupted. A series of deliveries that had occurred daily at 15 o'clock began arriving 30 minutes early. The Phantom, always cautious, had started altering routines unpredictably. Observers recorded anomalies: a car parked across the street for no apparent reason, a man who lingered on the balcony above the fruit market, a delivery van that reversed course mid-route. Each minor deviation demanded immediate recalibration of the network. No one could predict his next step, and that unpredictability became both their greatest frustration and their only clue. At a warehouse front, an operative discovered a message subtly embedded in a crate label. It read, "We know your steps." No signature, no indication of who had placed it, only the reminder that the Phantom was observing their observation. The message was unsettling because it was accurate. He had adjusted their routines, anticipated their surveillance posts, and tested their vigilance without ever appearing in person. The handlers convened in a cramped room, poring over logs and notes, attempting to trace the source of the message. After hours, they concluded only that the Phantom's reach was vast, perhaps extending into contacts they had never identified. By the third week of concentrated surveillance, the operation began to show signs of strain. Operatives embedded in safehouses complained of exhaustion, paranoia settling into the spaces between their thoughts. Every reflection became suspect, every passing vehicle a potential threat. Yael, reviewing the day's logs, noticed subtle anomalies in routine deliveries that suggested the Phantom had tested their ability to adapt. He had begun not just to evade them, but to manipulate the operation itself, probing for weakness. The realization sent a quiet shiver through the team. The hunted was now subtly hunting the hunters. An extraordinary event intensified the tension. One of the warehouse shipments arrived with a minor anomaly in packaging. A small envelope taped inside, easily missed if not thoroughly checked. It contained a map with specific coordinates marked, accompanied by a single phrase, "Step closer and you will see." There was no signature, no indication of intent, only the stark implication that the Phantom had deliberately communicated with them without meeting them. The handlers debated its meaning for hours. Was it a trap, a test, or a warning? The consensus? It was all three. Communication lines were tightened, encrypted messages replaced every ordinary call, and couriers carried information hidden in mundane transactions: milk deliveries, newspaper bundles, and laundry invoices. One operative, stationed in a small apartment near the southern bridge, intercepted a coded text disguised as a maintenance request. Route change 1723. Observe. Do not engage. Every member of the operation understood the stakes. One misread instruction, one error in timing, and the network itself could collapse. The Phantom's influence stretched further. Reports indicated he had established contacts among peripheral networks, local couriers, minor logistics operators, and even sympathetic citizens. His movements became more complex, using not only physical disguises, but also layers of deception that ensured no direct link to him. A delivery route might involve 3 vehicles, 2 intermediaries, and 4 separate false destinations, yet every stage aligned perfectly with his intended arrival. Observers marveled at the precision, realizing they were not just witnessing surveillance evasion, they were witnessing orchestration. Near exposures multiplied. One operative, following a secondary contact through a crowded square, was almost detected by a street vendor who recognized him from previous weeks. The operative froze, heart hammering, as the vendor approached with a question on his lips. Seconds stretched into eternity until the vendor simply shrugged and walked away. The operative exhaled quietly, knowing that a single misstep could unravel months of covert placement. The operation expanded its technical footprint. Hidden cameras were installed in select buildings, encrypted audio devices monitored couriers, and data streams were triangulated across multiple safehouses. Analysts worked around the clock, connecting dots invisible to the untrained eye, trying to anticipate the Phantom's next move. Despite these measures, he remained ahead, slipping through surveillance with a fluidity that frustrated and fascinated the handlers in equal measure. One evening, a field agent reported seeing him enter an abandoned textile factory on the outskirts of Damascus. The factory had been monitored for weeks without incident, yet that night, the Phantom's presence suggested he knew the perimeter as well as the watchers did. Inside, he lingered briefly, then disappeared again, leaving no trace. The handler's voice over the secure line was barely audible. "He's teaching us patience, or punishing us for our impatience. We can't know which." A new operative was assigned to trace these ghost routes, tasked with cataloging deviations in routine and monitoring anomalies that suggested the Phantom's manipulations. Every street he crossed, every alleyway he disappeared into, every building he touched, was now a node in an invisible network. The watchers followed meticulously, recording every detail, yet uncertainty remained absolute. They began to recognize a pattern in his unpredictability. He forced them to adjust constantly, creating an exhausting rhythm of anticipation and reaction. The psychological strain was visible. One handler, reviewing the logs of past months, noticed repetitive notation. Subject observed pausing mid-step, watching shadows. The operative realized that their prey not only evaded, but also studied them, testing their limits, measuring their responses, and subtly altering the flow of information. Fear, tension, and awe intertwined, creating a pervasive unease in the operation that no amount of planning could fully mitigate. In the following weeks, the Phantom escalated his misdirection. Vehicles were rerouted, courier handoffs occurred at irregular intervals, and safehouses that had been reliable suddenly became compromised. The Watchers noted every anomaly, yet the Phantom's brilliance was in ensuring no single disruption revealed a complete pattern. He forced the network to overcorrect, to question every assumption, to second-guess even the most secure positions. Each adjustment by the Watchers was met with subtle countermeasures, a dance of action and reaction performed entirely in silence. Tensions within the operation began to fray. Operatives questioned each other's judgment, handlers debated the best course, and small mistakes were magnified by the constant pressure. One courier, flustered after a near collision, accidentally exposed a safehouse's perimeter. The handler's instructions were sharp but measured: contain, observe, adapt. The incident underscored the fragility of their network, the delicate balance between observation and exposure. Encrypted signals became more elaborate, layered with multiple codes within codes. A message about a routine supply delivery might simultaneously carry coordinates for a new surveillance post and a subtle warning about a potential breach. Analysts worked feverishly, parsing each layer, aware that any misinterpretation could have operational consequences. The Phantom's omnipresence became almost mythic in their discussions. Yet, no one doubted the reality. He was tangible, intelligent, and terrifyingly skilled. By the end of this phase, the Watchers had constructed a dense web of observation across Damascus. Every alley, every street, every minor route had been analyzed, logged, and monitored. Yet the Phantom's presence persisted as an unseen force, moving with the city's rhythm while simultaneously bending it to his advantage. The final log entries for the period captured the essence of their ordeal. Observation complete. Pattern shifting. Subject aware, proceed with extreme caution. The operation had reached a tipping point. The Phantom had successfully blurred the lines between hunter and hunted. Every step taken to trap him only reinforced his mastery of concealment. The city itself seemed complicit, holding secrets in its shadows, and every operative understood that the next move would be critical. The Watchers had learned to endure, to anticipate, and to adapt, but the Phantom had shown them a level of cunning that could not be fully countered. As night fell, the streets of Damascus quieted once more, but the tension remained palpable. A single figure moved through the alleys, methodical, aware, untouchable. The operations network waited, breath held, every eye straining for the faintest hint, knowing that in this city of ghosts and shadows, the line between victory and catastrophe was thinner than a single heartbeat. And somewhere in the stillness, the Phantom smiled faintly, aware that the hunters were as trapped in his web as anyone who dared enter his world. The city exhaled in the late afternoon heat, oblivious to the network of eyes tracing its every alley, every shadow, every minor movement. Across Damascus, safe houses hummed quietly with activity. Operatives hunched over logs, photographs, and signal intercepts, tracing threads that were already fraying under the Phantom's deliberate manipulation. Every courier, every shipment, every movement was scrutinized, yet the Phantom continued to move like a ghost across the city, testing the boundaries of their vigilance. Each day, his deviations grew bolder, patterns more complex, and the Watchers found themselves dancing to a rhythm set entirely by him. At a small, unremarkable cafe near the northern square, one of the embedded agents traced the Phantom's supposed routine through the crowd. He lingered at the edge of the terrace, notebook open, eyes darting beneath a nondescript hat. The Phantom appeared at precisely 14:37, pausing just long enough to exchange a package with a man whose presence had not been logged in any surveillance record. The operative's hand froze mid-note. A single misstep, a miscalculated glance, could have exposed months of meticulous observation. And yet, by the time the agent lowered his pen, the phantom had vanished into the folds of the city, leaving only a whisper of presence. Simultaneously, another team tracked a convoy that intersected with the phantom's route near a busy bridge. Vehicles that should have traveled independently converged almost magically, rerouting through narrow streets, evading checkpoints, and leaving the watchers scrambling to realign their positions. Encrypted messages flashed across secure lines. Deviation observed, adapt immediately. Agents recalibrated silently, repositioning without leaving a trace, yet the realization sank in that the phantom had anticipated this maneuver before it even began. He was shaping the operation as much as they were shaping him. The first real near capture occurred in a residential district that had been under covert observation for months. An operative stationed on a rooftop saw the phantom exit a building and move toward a side street they had monitored meticulously. A car approached from an unplanned direction, a phantom vehicle of his own design. The operative tracked both with precise calculation, heart-hammering, knowing that even a split-second miscalculation could unravel the entire surveillance grid. The phantom paused briefly, glancing at the operative's position, or so it seemed, then melted into an alley. The operative exhaled slowly, a brush with discovery, yet the phantom had been aware without revealing himself. A masterstroke of psychological manipulation. In a separate safe house, Yael and her team were poring over shipment logs, cross-referencing the phantom's recent movements with deliveries recorded weeks earlier. One delivery, ostensibly routine, bore subtle discrepancies, slight tape variations, fingerprints from unknown individuals, and minor adjustments in routing that suggested prior knowledge of the operation. "He is probing our network," Yael muttered, tracing the lines with her fingers. Her assistant, a young analyst fluent in local dialects, nodded gravely. Every deviation, every inconsistency was a message, a test, and a warning wrapped in silence. The network adapted, as it always had, but the strain was palpable. Couriers became hyper-aware, their movements deliberate, shadows studied with obsessive care. Safehouses rotated like clockwork, every position scrutinized for vulnerability. One operative noted that even the most minor noise, footsteps, a shutter closing, a vehicle engine, felt amplified, laden with threat. The phantom's genius was not only in evasion but in manipulation. He had turned the network itself into a labyrinth, one misstep away from compromise. By evening, the city's pulse seemed synchronized with the phantom's movements. In a quiet alleyway near the southern district, a junior operative followed a suspected contact, notebook ready, pen poised. The contact paused abruptly, glanced upward, and smiled faintly, as if acknowledging the unseen watcher. The operative froze, realizing that the phantom was likely aware of his presence, perhaps even guiding the interaction. Seconds stretched like hours, and when the contact moved on, the operative exhaled, aware that the ghost's manipulation was becoming audacious, personal. Encrypted communications carried every instruction and observation with surgical precision. Messages disguised as mundane supply requests conveyed routing changes, safehouse rotations, and alerts about potential exposure. Each operator learned to read between the lines, to sense intent behind the omission of words. A delayed response could indicate compromise. An unexpected answer could signal interception. The phantom had embedded himself so fully into the city's rhythm that even the communications, once thought secure, were now a battlefield of misdirection and subtle signals. A small warehouse near the old textile district became a focal point. Packages arrived bearing no signatures, shipments listed as generic goods but containing hidden compartments. An operative tracing the crates noticed subtle anomalies. Tape markings inconsistent with standard procedure, minor abrasions suggesting handling by someone familiar with the operation's routines. The Phantom had engineered these deviations to test their observation, gauging both skill and patience. It was a reminder that even the smallest detail could carry monumental significance. The first hints of internal tension emerged. Operatives questioned each other's judgment, whispered doubts about protocols, and speculated about potential moles. Paranoia, subtle at first, began to permeate the network. Yael observed her team with quiet concern. Even trained professionals could not entirely escape the psychological weight of months spent anticipating the movements of someone who seemed to anticipate them in return. The Phantom was teaching them patience, fear, and humility in equal measure. Nightfall brought no relief. The streets of Damascus grew quieter, shadows longer, and operatives moved like phantoms themselves, conscious of every sound, every reflection. One agent, positioned near a quiet intersection, observed a figure slipping between buildings with uncanny precision. The Phantom's silhouette was unmistakable, yet he seemed to vanish before any direct engagement could occur. A nearby courier whispered over the line, voice taut, "He's testing us again." The handler replied, "Then we adapt, one step at a time." Every movement, every response was a calibration, a subtle test of the network's resilience. The city itself became a character in the operation. Couriers, pedestrians, vendors, and vehicles all moved in patterns that intersected unknowingly with the Phantom's choreography. Observers realized that no one could anticipate every interaction. The urban landscape was both ally and obstacle, amplifying the uncertainty that had come to define the operation. Even the most secure fronts, carefully monitored for weeks, were vulnerable to minor deviations that could ripple into exposure. In one of the northern safehouses, an envelope arrived with no sender, containing only a folded photograph of the central square where the team had observed the Phantom hours earlier. On the back, a single phrase was written in meticulous handwriting, "Closer than you think." It was both warning and a reminder. He knew their every move, every position, and possibly every operative by sight. The message ignited tension across the network. The Phantom was no longer just elusive, he was omnipresent in their minds. Over the next several days, the operation tightened further. Observation points were refined, safe house rotations increased, and encrypted communications layered with multiple codes became the norm. The Phantom's movements became increasingly sophisticated, combining physical evasion with psychological misdirection. Vehicles would appear and disappear without clear origin. Couriers would alter routes at the last second, and patterns that seemed predictable dissolved into chaos. Every operational adjustment met a subtle countermeasure, a testament to the Phantom's mastery of both strategy and perception. Near captures continued to escalate. One operative, following a Phantom-associated contact along a narrow street, nearly collided with a civilian who had been unknowingly enlisted as part of the misdirection. The operative froze, heart hammering, aware that the moment could unravel weeks of placement. The Phantom had engineered the encounter, or at least exploited the chaos with precision. The message was unmistakable. Even minor mistakes had consequences, and the Phantom was always several steps ahead. In a clandestine apartment near the Southern District, Yael compiled logs, photographs, and intercepted signals, noting the Phantom's evolving strategy. Minor deviations now included false meetings, deliberately misrouted deliveries, and brief appearances at previously surveilled locations. The operation had become a game of anticipation versus adaptation, with the Phantom dictating tempo, forcing the network to move cautiously, deliberately, and in constant suspense. As night deepened, the Phantom orchestrated a subtle test of the network's limits. A secondary contact, long monitored, changed routine unexpectedly, leading a junior operative into a side street that had not been mapped for observation. The operative's heart raced as he realized the deviation was almost certainly deliberate, a probe to gauge both skill and patience. By the time he returned to base, shaken but undetected, the full implication was clear. The Phantom's mastery extended beyond movement. He could manipulate both space and perception. The city held its breath as the network adapted once more. Observation points shifted, front operations rotated, and encrypted communications layered with additional codes ensured minimal risk. Yet even these measures could not fully mitigate the Phantom's advantage. Every alley, every rooftop, every minor deviation became a test of skill, patience, and nerve. The Watchers began to understand the ultimate truth. The closer they came to capturing him, the more dangerous every movement became. By the final week of this phase, the operation had reached a tense equilibrium. The Phantom's network of deception, misdirection, and subtle psychological manipulation had forced the Watchers to their limits. Couriers moved cautiously, safehouses rotated with surgical precision, and encrypted messages contained multiple layers of coded information. Yet, despite all measures, the Phantom's presence remained pervasive, his movements fluid, and his anticipation near omniscient. The culmination of Part 5 arrives not in confrontation, but in realization. The hunters are as ensnared in the web as the hunted. The Phantom has tested their operational limits, their patience, and their resilience. Every near exposure, every coded message, every deviation in routine has been part of a carefully orchestrated plan to ensure that even without direct engagement, he remains untouchable. And as the night stretches across Damascus, the city quiet and indifferent, the Watchers know that the next phase of the operation will demand more than skill. It will demand endurance, courage, and an acceptance that invisibility in this city is temporary, fragile, and constantly challenged. The night stretched over Damascus like a heavy, silent curtain, and the city itself seemed to conspire with the Phantom. Every shadow, every narrow alley, every flickering streetlight became a potential point of observation, a trap or a test. Within the network, operatives moved cautiously, their nerves taut from weeks of relentless anticipation, their eyes tracing invisible lines in the air where the Phantom might appear at any moment. The feeling was universal. He was everywhere and nowhere, a presence that dictated the rhythm of their lives without ever revealing himself. Inside a dimly lit safe house, Yael examined logs from the previous day's surveillance, marking anomalies in delivery schedules, altered routes, and minor deviations in behavior. One operative's report detailed a brief, unlogged stop by a suspected contact, timed so precisely it could only have been intentional. Yael traced the movement on a map, feeling a chill as she realized that the Phantom was deliberately creating patterns for them to follow, testing their observation and judgment. The realization spread through the room like electricity. The hunted was now the manipulator, and the hunters were dancing to his silent tune. Elsewhere, an embedded agent in a crowded market followed a minor courier linked to the Phantom. The operative's gaze flicked from the courier to the surrounding crowd, noting every unusual glance, every hesitant step. Suddenly, a man emerged from an alley, blending seamlessly with pedestrians, but carrying a small package with markings invisible to the untrained eye. The operative's pulse quickened as he traced the movement, knowing that even a single error could compromise months of careful positioning. By the time he signaled back, the package had disappeared into the crowd, leaving only the faintest trace that the Phantom had been present, or had orchestrated the entire encounter. Encrypted communications became increasingly sophisticated. Messages hidden within innocuous supply orders or maintenance requests carried subtle instructions, warnings, and test coordinates. Operatives learned to read between the lines, interpreting pauses, repetitions, and omissions as critical information. One misinterpreted symbol, one overlooked nuance, and the operation could collapse in an instant. The Phantom's strategy was apparent. He sought to bend the network to his will, to keep every operative second-guessing, to exploit the limits of human perception. A sudden deviation in routine deliveries forced an immediate reaction. Vehicles that had been expected at standard intervals arrived hours early or late, carrying goods that appeared mundane but contained embedded tracking information. The network scrambled to adjust observation posts, reposition operatives, and verify the integrity of their data. By the end of the day, it became clear that the Phantom had intentionally introduced variability to gauge both the network's responsiveness and the operator's patience. Every movement, every adjustment had been observed and anticipated. In the quiet hours before dawn, one operative stationed on a rooftop noticed a figure moving along the rooftops opposite his own. The silhouette was precise, controlled, and calculated. He signaled the observation team below, but the figure vanished before they could triangulate its position. Later, in reviewing footage, the team noticed something subtle. Shadows shifted in ways that suggested the Phantom had known exactly where they were, even without appearing in the frame. The psychological impact was profound. The Phantom did not just evade, he manipulated perception itself. Internal tensions within the network began to surface. Operatives whispered doubts about each other's judgment, questioned timing, and speculated about potential leaks. Paranoia seeped in, subtle yet pervasive, a reflection of the psychological strain imposed by the Phantom's tactics. Yael recognized the danger. When fear became operational, mistakes were inevitable. She reminded her team constantly that every action had to be deliberate, every reaction measured. The line between vigilance and obsession blurred with each passing day. One courier, tasked with a routine drop-off, reported a near collision with a civilian who, unbeknownst to them, was part of a misdirection orchestrated by the Phantom. The operative froze, aware that any engagement could compromise the network. The handler's instructions over the secure line were terse: observe, adapt, survive. It was a reminder that the operation's success depended not just on skill, but on discipline, patience, and restraint. Every near exposure became both a test and a lesson in operational humility. A minor anomaly in shipment packaging provided further insight into the Phantom's manipulations. Crates that had previously arrived undisturbed now contained subtle inconsistencies, slight differences in tape placement, minor abrasions, and unusual labeling. Analysts pored over the details, recognizing that each deviation was a message, a test of attention and thoroughness. The Phantom's presence was never direct, but profoundly felt, an invisible hand shaping the network's responses. In the following week, the operation intensified. Observation posts rotated with increased frequency, encrypted messages incorporated multiple layers of code, and couriers moved with heightened caution. Yet the Phantom remained several steps ahead, exploiting human error, testing patience, and weaving subtle misdirections into every movement. His mastery was evident. He had transformed the city into a living chessboard, with operatives as pieces constantly maneuvered against their will. By the mid-phase of Part 6, a critical near-exposure occurred. An operative following a secondary contact slipped into a narrow alleyway, only to find a package waiting, intentionally placed in the path to provoke engagement. The operative froze, aware that even touching it could compromise the network. The Phantom's strategy was clear. He was forcing operatives to react, to demonstrate patience, and to endure the psychological tension of inaction while the world continued around them. The city itself became complicit. Pedestrians, vehicles, vendors, all unaware, moved within orchestrated patterns that intersected with the Phantom's choreography. Observers realized that no single vantage point could capture the entirety of his movements. The urban landscape amplified the uncertainty, making even routine observation fraught with risk. Every step, every glance, every decision carried potential consequences. At a northern safe house, Yael compiled notes from multiple fronts. She noted deviations in expected behavior, discrepancies in delivery logs, and unexplained delays. Each observation added a layer to the Phantom's psychological manipulation. The operative team was forced into hyper-awareness, a state where every routine became a potential trap and every minor anomaly a test of judgment. The Phantom had transformed patience into an operational weapon. In a final sequence of events before the week closed, a secondary operative noted a figure slipping past a previously monitored checkpoint, blending seamlessly into the night. The observation team triangulated, recalibrated, and logged every detail, only to realize that the movement itself may have been staged to test both their observation and their ability to remain undetected. The Phantom's genius lay in creating situations where success and failure were indistinguishable, where every response was measured and analyzed for weakness. The cumulative tension reached its zenith in the closing hours of Part 6. Operatives were exhausted, hyper-aware, and haunted by the understanding that the hunted had become the architect of their psychological endurance. The Phantom's shadow had stretched across Damascus, manipulating perception, testing patience, and orchestrating a game in which every participant was unknowingly a player. The network, despite its skill, remained a step behind, adapting constantly to a foe who anticipated their every move without ever revealing himself. As dawn approached, the city seemed to pause, holding its breath for what the day might bring. Operatives checked equipment, reviewed encrypted logs, and adjusted observation posts, yet an unshakable sense of being watched persisted. Somewhere, the Phantom moved with precision, aware of every response, orchestrating every misstep, shaping the network's actions like a master conductor. The realization settled over the watchers. The battle was no longer simply about tracking him. It was about surviving the psychological weight of knowing they were never truly in control. The final lines of Part 6 leave the audience with an uneasy clarity. In this city of shadows, the line between hunter and hunted is blurred, and the Phantom's mastery lies not in confrontation, but in the quiet manipulation of perception, patience, and fear. Every operative knows it, every observer feels it, and every calculated move carries the silent question: who truly controls the game? The city of Damascus slept uneasily, unaware that every alley, every rooftop, every unremarkable street corner had been claimed by an invisible war. Within the operations network, exhaustion had seeped into the bones of every operative, yet the rhythm of vigilance continued, driven by necessity, fear, and the silent understanding that a single lapse could undo months of careful orchestration. The Phantom moved like a shadow that bent reality itself, testing routines, probing reactions, and measuring patience. Every heartbeat felt magnified, every whisper of movement laden with potential danger. By the early hours, Yael had assembled the final operational logs, marking deviations, near captures, and misdirections with meticulous precision. A small cluster of shipments, previously routed predictably, had shifted inexplicably, intersecting with multiple observation posts. The handlers understood immediately. The Phantom was deliberately drawing the network into a web of anticipation, forcing operatives to act, hesitate, and question their own assumptions. The line between action and reaction had blurred entirely, and the psychological weight was nearly unbearable. In a quiet residential district, a junior operative traced a Phantom-associated contact along narrow, twisting streets. The figure paused outside a shop that had long been monitored as a minor courier node, glanced briefly at the operative's position, then vanished into a side alley. The operative froze, realizing that even their most subtle movements had been observed. He signaled silently to headquarters, heart pounding, aware that the Phantom was testing not just vigilance, but composure under pressure. Every second became a measured test of endurance, and every misstep could unravel the carefully constructed surveillance web. Encrypted communications crackled with layers of coded instruction. One seemingly mundane message, a maintenance request for a water pump, carried within it coordinates for a new observation post, a warning about a potential breach, and subtle guidance on timing for safe extraction. Operatives parsed the message carefully, knowing that misunderstanding a single layer could compromise weeks of effort. The Phantom had engineered a system where every message was both a tool and a trap, and the hunters were forced to navigate the labyrinth he had constructed. At a rooftop overlooking the southern district, another operative watched as vehicles moved with uncharacteristic irregularity. Trucks that had previously followed predictable routes now reversed course, paused unexpectedly, or carried inconspicuous packages with undetectable variations. The operative's pulse quickened with every deviation. The Phantom had anticipated the network's response, introducing controlled chaos to assess adaptability and discipline. Every shift was a silent interrogation of skill and patience, a test of the human elements that no code or camera could replace. Tensions escalated internally. Operatives whispered doubts about each other's judgment, questioned decisions made under duress, and speculated about potential moles. Yael recognized the danger. Psychological strain could be as lethal as physical exposure. She instructed with precision and calm. Every action must be deliberate, every observation logged, every hesitation noted, but never acted upon impulsively. The network's cohesion was being tested as rigorously as its tactical acumen. A sudden anomaly marked the apex of operational suspense. A minor contact, previously considered peripheral, altered a routine handoff, intersecting with an unexpected civilian presence. The operative on site froze, hand poised over radio, heart hammering, aware that a single misstep could compromise the network. Across the city, other observation points were recalibrating in real time, adjusting to deviations that had been deliberately staged. It was a masterclass in misdirection. The Phantom forced simultaneous reactions, making success and failure nearly indistinguishable. Safehouses rotated with surgical precision. Every delivery was scrutinized for hidden anomalies. Encrypted messages layered with multiple codes ensured minimal risk of interception, yet the Phantom remained untouchable. He orchestrated minor exposures to gauge endurance, deliberately inserting uncertainty into every operation. Operatives moved like ghosts themselves, hyper-aware of shadows, sounds, and fleeting glances that could indicate observation or trap. By midweek, the network reached a tense equilibrium, the culmination of months of meticulous surveillance. Observation points were refined, routes recalculated, and cryptic messages parsed with obsessive care. Yet, despite the exhaustive measures, the Phantom remained several steps ahead, his movements imperceptible, his manipulations invisible yet profoundly felt. The network had adapted, but the cost was evident in every line of tension across operatives' faces, every pause in their communication, every silent calculation before action. The final prelude to the climactic phase occurred at a small warehouse near the old textile district. Packages had shifted once again, intersecting multiple observation posts simultaneously. A junior operative traced the movement of a delivery, noting subtle inconsistencies, tape placement, abrasion patterns, and fleeting markings invisible to cursory inspection. Each anomaly was a test, each movement a probe into the network's limits. The realization was unanimous. The Phantom had created a game where visibility, accuracy, and patience were weaponized, and the hunters were participants in a match they could never fully control. Night fell, and the city seemed suspended in anticipation. Operatives checked equipment, reviewed encrypted messages, and recalibrated observation points, yet the feeling of being watched was pervasive. The Phantom had woven himself into every movement, every calculation, every response. His mastery lay not in confrontation, but in subtle orchestration, a psychological domination of the hunters, forcing them to react, adapt, and endure, while never fully understanding his intentions. In the hours before dawn, a faintly marked envelope appeared at a previously monitored dead drop. Inside was a folded map of the city, with certain alleys and streets highlighted, accompanied by a single phrase, "All moves anticipated, be prepared." The message crystallized the network's awareness. The Phantom had orchestrated months of observation to bring them to this precise moment, a silent countdown toward an event they were not permitted to witness. The thrill, the dread, and the operational tension coalesced into a nearly unbearable focus, a realization that every calculated move had been anticipated and every response measured. By the final moments of Part 7, the city lay quiet, yet the tension was taut as a wire. The watchers, the handlers, the couriers, all moved with a precision born of fear, skill, and obsession. Every operative understood the stakes. The Phantom was untouchable, his mastery of misdirection and psychological manipulation absolute, and the network's survival depended on endurance, composure, and flawless execution. Damascus had become a chessboard, the Phantom, the invisible grandmaster, and the hunter's pieces moving entirely at his will. The narrative closes on a suspended note. The Phantom's presence is undeniable, his strategies perfected, and the network is pushed to the brink of operational and psychological endurance. Every step they take is shadowed, every thought anticipated, and every moment charged with potential catastrophe. The audience is left with a lingering tension, a sense of unresolved dread, and the haunting understanding that in the silent war of shadows, the hunted can always become the ultimate manipulator. As Damascus fades into silence, the shadow of the Phantom lingers, untouched, unseen, and unknowable. Years of planning, deception, and ghostly maneuvers have led to a network stretched to its limits, a city unaware of the invisible war waged in its streets. And yet, the story doesn't end here. Every alley, every coded message, every misstep echoes the question, who truly controls the game, when the hunter is always a step behind the ghost? If you thought you knew the world of spies, think again. The Phantom of Damascus proves that the deadliest operations aren't always fought with weapons. They're fought in silence, patience, and pure strategy. Hit like if you were gripped by every twist and near capture. Subscribe for more untold espionage stories that reveal the shadows behind history, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next covert mission that the world wasn't supposed to see. The ghost is still out there. Are you ready to follow him into the shadows?